Hi there. Welcome, everyone. And we are here for season two. I know there's been a bit of a gap, but you know what? That's always something which is worth. If you have, if you're going to get something really interesting, then there's probably something worth waiting for. So today is that first episode, and I hope you are all excited because I'm really looking forward to this conversation with my first guest for this season. Who better than Saul Kaplan to kick it off? And Saul, you've read his bio, so he is someone who's really the founder of the Business Innovation Factory. So that's something that I found really puzzling because here is a guy who talks about a factory and then he also says the scaling up will kill innovation. So I kind of really thought that that was quite interesting. But and this is really going to be the crux of our conversation. And from there, it is going to be many things because Saul really likes to talk about many different things, and so do I. So, we are going to end up talking about heaven knows what. So, with that, welcome everyone. And I'm so delighted to welcome Saul to this particular show. So, Saul, why don't you tell us a little about some of the inflection points of your career? What are those two or three things that have really shaped your point of view?
Well, first of all, Abhijit, wonderful to see you. I think Saul just likes to talk a lot. It's really great to be with you. Honored to kick off your second season. I really describe myself as a hopeful innovation junkie, but I'm very focused on a part of the innovation conversation, which is transformation. I respect all of the effort put into incremental improvements and all of the innovation work that makes the way the world works today a little bit better. But I think we live in a time that screams for transformation. So my entire life and career has been about how do we make transformation safer and easier to manage. Never easy, but can we do it systematically? And that's where the word factory comes in around BIF, right? Because we need to be able to produce new ventures, new business models, and I'm particularly focused on the ones that could actually change society for the better. So it's great. I'm happy to mix it up with you today.
So, when people sort of think about innovation and transformation, these are words which I used quite a lot. And so I always find it worthwhile to ask people, when you say, innovation, what does that really mean? And what does transformation mean for you? So describe the words and then we'll take it from there.
No, I think it's important to start there because that's one of our biggest problems. When you say the word innovation or you throw out words like transformation, right? Everybody you talk to, if you talk to 10 people, you get 20 different definitions. And I don't know how we organize for innovation and get people and capabilities aligned to change the value equation unless we agree on what we mean by innovation. So for me, very simple. Innovation is a better way to deliver value, a better way to deliver value. Emphasis on the delivery. It's not an innovation to me unless it actually solves a problem in the real world for a human, right? Then it qualifies in my book as an innovation. Don't confuse it with invention. Right? We invent a lot of things. I love that society is very obsessed with inventing new technology, new tools, and new approaches. I hope we never change that. But inventing something new doesn't make it an innovation in the real world, working to solve problems. So I've been very focused on what does it mean to deliver better value. And I've always been focused on the business model as what our friend Alex Osterwalder calls, the unit of analysis. We have to learn to think in terms of our business models, whether we're a business or any other institution. And I actually think we need to think that way as individuals. And I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, because, I've shared, some of the links. I've shared the link of your book and I've shared, some of the articles and the Business Model Innovation Factory, the book is there. So highly recommend that you guys take a look at this. And there are, of course, two articles. And I was in particular, that's what got me thinking that obsession with scalability must end. Because when you think about all startups, what do they really think of? They don't really think of serving one person. They want to say that when is it that my product or service is going to be used by everybody, if not all around the world, certainly all across the country. So in my book Dreamers and Unicorns, I talk about moving from dreamer to unicorn. You achieve that when everybody in your country, geographical boundary, knows about your product, uses the product, and your product has evolved to be able to sort of encapsulate such a large user base. But you kind of seem to disagree with that. Why?
Yeah, well, first of all, I learned this, right, the hard way, right? Lots and lots of years as a road warrior consultant where leaders in the executive suite banged their fist on the table and said, we want to transform, right? And then they went back to their office, and then the teams that we worked with over time ended up doing important but incremental things to the current business model, not changing the entire business model. And one of the major reasons why we don't do transformational things, even though we might have the idea to do it, the reason it never gets off of the whiteboard is because we're obsessed with scale. You start to get questions, and we all know these questions, right? We get 8,000 questions, right, about what does it look like at scale? Right? What's the return on investment? How long is it going to take to get payback? Right? We think we can analyze our way to something transformational. I learned the hard way, and I had to completely reinvent myself. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but I learned the hard way that you cannot analyze your way to transformation. It's a generative act. You have to explore your way there. Now, I learned how to make predictions and to do fancy spreadsheets in order to get a nickel, from someone to invest in my projects. We all learn how to do that. But if you watch entrepreneurs, and I've been watching my whole life, nobody ever gets their business model right on the first try, right? Even the most successful entrepreneur puts the spreadsheet together, tries to raise the nickel, right, with a fancy plan with numbers about scale and the future. And then when it hits the brunt of customer contact, it's in the real world, right? Most entrepreneurs I know that have been successful, it's the third, fourth, fifth try before they land on a business model that might be scalable. So if we start too soon being obsessed with scale, and we have to answer questions to funders and stakeholders about the 8,000 reasons why, right, I don't think this will work, or until you can tell me with certainty what scale looks like, I'm not giving you a nickel, right? When we live in a world then that to do something transformational requires you to imagine it, render it in the real world, and then worry about scale. So there's a time to worry about scale, but we can't use it to kill ideas before they ever get off the drawing board. So I think we have to put new models into the market and allow them to emerge. And it's the learning that we do in the real world and the data we get from that experience that starts to create the evidence or the proof that gives us more confidence to invest more of our time and to invest more dollars in scale. So there's a time for scale and share taking, right? And there's a time for the generative piece where you're trying to bring something wholly new in the world that can actually change society and do something truly transformational. And I've been trying to build the tools and the mental mindsets and models to get more people comfortable with, I use the technical term, trying more stuff. Can we get our ideas faster off the drawing board, out into the real world, so that we can prototype them and see if they start to work, and then worry about scale once we have something that's actually scalable, instead of sitting back in our offices and in our conference rooms, analyzing with decks till the cows come home, only to learn that once we put it into the real world, it isn't going to work and change the value equation. So why did we spend all that time worrying about how to scale it? So I think our obsession with scale is getting in our way and killing innovation. And then the last thing I'll say on this is I actually think it's worse than that. It isn't just stopping us from innovating and putting new models in the world, which it certainly is. It's leaving too many people behind around the world because we have this obsession with scale that says one model wins. and it's a war to see which one of these models is going to scale, to be the king of the mountain, right? That's the world we lived in during the industrial era, right? And it's been true. And those models don't work for everybody. And so we leave more and more people behind. We need an environment. There will always be large models that have scaled, but we need the generative process to allow new models to emerge. And we have to stop leaning against that, or we're never going to get the transformation that I think we all want and need in society and around the world.
One of the questions here, which has come up here from, a listener question. Thank you very much for that. I mean, the question that they're looking at is, and I'm going to paraphrase it a little bit. The question is that, is innovation something when you are trying to create value, that's necessarily something that's going to take time? Is that why you should first figure out the value question before you think of the scale question? Is that what you are recommending?
Well, you have to separate it. I spend a lot of time with leaders, like trying to get them to think differently about incremental innovation, things that we do to improve the model we're already in, right? The way a business works, the way an industry works, the way a school works, the way a hospital works, right? That kind of innovation can be more predictable. We can do the spreadsheets for those. We can decide between project A, B, or C. That's what we learned how to do, right? Some do it better than others, right? But if you want to do transformational work, right, that will not work, because think about it. By definition, the more predictable it is, the more certain it is, the less likely that it's truly transformational. If it's going to be transformational, you have to allow it to emerge, and that takes time. So we need a different set of metrics on how we make sure that we're making progress towards transformational new business models. The existing metrics that we use for incremental innovation don't work. We need a different set of skills and tools. And I'll talk to you about what I call the 3 superpowers, the things I had to learn to do as a scientist MBA. It worked pretty well in that obsession with scale error. It doesn't work so well in the transformational error. So I've had to learn an entire new set of superpowers, things like human-centered design, rapid prototyping, and storytelling and engagement, which is what I call the 3 superpowers of transformation. And we can unbundle those, because I think they're really relevant to the skills we need as individuals and as companies and organizations and as communities as we try to render the future that we all want and need around the world.
So I'm going to sort of ask you a sidebar question, which is that, a lot of people talk about an MBA becoming irrelevant. Is that true? Do you think that's what it is? Or is it that MBA needs to itself evolve because businesses and the models are evolving? So what is your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, I've come full circle on this as I've reinvented myself. Right. And I've learned about the life skills of reinvention that I then apply to enterprises and to communities. But I learned it in enterprises, right? Because I grew up, working for large companies, consulting to large companies, right? And so I do think that you can learn to do it, but you've got to approach it differently with a different mindset. Not sure I answered your question well. Give me the nut of that question again.
And so, if you had to really, if you didn't have an MBA, would you do it today? Would you sort of invest time and money?
So thank you. I have an MBA. And the superpowers it gave me, which, well, I'm going to talk about new superpowers we need. I didn't leave the old ones behind, right? So that the superpowers I needed as a scientist, I had no clue how resources and people and strategies moved through companies and enterprises. I mean, I had no idea what that was about. And I had no idea about financial modeling, and how to make that work at every scale of an operation. So I'm I'm glad I have those superpowers, but those superpowers are not the core superpowers necessary to do transformational work, to design compelling new business models that have the capacity to change systems, which is what we all want and need. So I think it's a both and. I often joke, if I could do it again, if you force me, right? I'm glad to have both sets of skills now, but I'd probably go more towards the MFA, where I could learn human-centered design and rapid prototyping and how to imagine the future in a compelling way and engage people to involve themselves in that future so that we can increase the chances of doing it. So I think those things are critical for transformation, and I don't see how you get there with just the pure MBA skills. Now, a lot of MBA programs are recognizing that, and they're working really hard to change it, as are the MFA programs that are coming the other way, trying to build the analytical organization, change management, like those kinds of skills, that are necessary for transformational change. So we'll see who wins that race.
Sure. And it seems, if I were to sort of, summarize the idea that you talked about, it seems that, earlier the way the world was, it is the hard skills, which is how do you analyze, how do you sort of create financial models, etc. All of that seemed to, give you a competitive advantage in the world of business. But now, as the world of business itself is changing a lot, some of the software elements like, human-centered design, rapid prototyping, or storytelling, these are the software elements that seem to become far more important because there isn't a definitive path. And that, I think, is potentially the shift. But, this was...
Can I, with respect, kind of push back on that? Whenever anybody, I'm not singling you out here. Whenever anybody uses the dichotomy of hard versus soft skills, I immediately challenge it. And if you really get me started, we'll have to spend the whole rest of the hour on it, right? These aren't hard versus soft skills. The connotation of that is these are the ones that are important. They're the hard skills. These are the soft, fluffy, skills, that we need over here. That's not true. They're both superpowers. You use those superpowers in order to change the world, to build new businesses, right? To build new business models, right? And to think of them as hard versus soft, I think is the wrong way to think about it. I think we have to think about competencies and superpowers that we need in a very rapidly changing world. And I would argue that it's what you called soft skills that are the hard skills today. And the others are really the soft skills that you need to, of course, we need a financial model, right? Or else we're not going to be able to have the resources necessary, to scale our models, right? But you don't start with that. You start with what's the proposition in the real world? What are you trying to change? What's the job you're trying to do for a customer? And it's those skills of human-centered design and rapid prototyping and storytelling. That's the only way we're going to transform anything. So to me, they start to look like harder skills to get and to build and sustain than the skills of analysis and creating strategic insights from lots of data, which are important. I'm glad I have those superpowers, but I really don't. I really bristle when those skills are called the hard skills. I hope you don't mind.
No, not at all. I mean, because I spent my bulk of my work is really working in the soft skills sort of space. Because so for me, I realized that those are much more difficult to teach. They are easy to learn because learning puts the responsibility onto your own self. Teaching is somebody else's responsibility. And
but wait, is the objective to teach, or is the objective to have new practices that we can use to innovate and transform with? Right? If the objective is to teach, okay, I might debate you on that, but the way to think about this is, what does it mean to build a new superpower? And I would tell you, getting somebody like me, who's a scientist MBA, to reinvent to someone who's about human-centered design, right, at the core, right? let me tell you, that might be easy to get me to understand the concepts in a classroom, not so easy to do in the real world, right? Reinvention is hard. Like, those skills are really hard to do, and yet they're the most important skills, and why a lot of innovation isn't happening.
So we have one of our viewers, Prem, says, "I love it when you say superpower." So he really likes it. And
Well,
yes, I mean, how do you distinguish between superpower and competency? Are they sort of used interchangeably, or?
I don't, but I'm trying to make it personal, right? Because when I wrote the book, I fell into the same trap. I wrote the first chapters about enterprises, right? By then I'd extended enterprises to beyond companies, to include all institutions, because we can come back to this if you want, right? It isn't just companies that have business models that are straitjackets by design. That's what they were designed to do. They weren't designed for transformation, right? And so if you want to reimagine a business model, a whole business model, not just a component of one, right, you're going to have to get a lot better at that. And that's what I've spent my whole career and life doing. And the reason I use superpowers is I made that the last chapter in my book, right? People have business models too. And what I've learned along the way is if we don't learn how to reinvent ourselves, right, we're never going to reinvent companies, enterprises, and then we can go up to communities and society. It starts with us. So superpowers are interchangeable in my mind with competencies. They're the power to do something, and superpowers are the most important ones. We all have lots of competencies. Organizations, every company I know. Although what happens when you go into a company, Abhijit, I ask them for their competencies, never mind superpowers. If I say superpowers, they throw me out, right? But if I use the word competencies, they get it, right? And I ask them to give me a list of their core competencies, and they hand me their org chart. And I'm like, no, I didn't ask you for your org chart. I don't want to know your power structure and what functional silos you have, in your enterprise. I want to know what superpowers, what competencies you have. And you know what? Most companies can't answer the question. They don't have a clear view, a shared view of what their superpowers are. And if you don't have that, how are you ever going to transform your business model? Because a business model is made up of superpowers, core competencies, the ones that really drive value, and then a whole bunch of enabling competencies, like we know how to order paper clips, for the desk. Okay, we have a competency to do it. I'd hardly call that a superpower that drives value in the enterprise. But yet when you get to customer experience and how we put the customer into our business models at the core, and how we design to change the value equation for a customer, that gets really core. And those things are really hard. Those are the ones that are hard to change. Most of the early innovation was on the, how do we buy paper clips cheaper and faster, right? Now we're getting to the real stuff. So now it gets interesting.
Oh, when you sort of really think back on your journey, what got you started about this whole thing about human-centered design? Because really the crux of, and maybe, you should explain this for the benefit of all of us, that, when you say human-centered design, what does that really mean for you? That you start with the customer, is that what it is? Or do you start with the human being? Do you start with a societal issue that you should be looking at? What's your initial point?
So I'll give you a little bit of the context of how I got here. So, again, scientist, MBA, working in corporate America, playing what a share-taking game, even though we talked about transformation, right? We were trying to strengthen our business model. We weren't trying to change the business model, right? And I kept wondering, what is it going to take if we really had to transform, or if we wanted to proactively transform to, reshape the industry we were in? We used to use those words a lot in consulting, right? How do we become industry shapers, right? Was language that we used for a lot of years. So I left industry right? And then I was in consulting where all of my clients were large companies. And then I came back to my home state here in Rhode Island, in the States, smallest state in the country. And I made the mistake of becoming an accidental bureaucrat. I actually went into government, right? The governor at the time in my state came from the business world, and he made the mistake of putting me into our economic development agency, first as the #2 guy. He went back to Wall Street, and then I joined his cabinet and became an accidental bureaucrat. It changed my entire view of what innovation is. All the years previously, I saw innovation through the lens of an enterprise, a company, my clients. For the first time, I saw innovation through the lens of the people who live in our community, consumers, students, citizens, patients, right? And I started to think about the business models that these companies and institutions, these were business models that have been around 100 years. This is how a university works. You know, this is how a company in the pharmaceutical industry works, or in the drugstore industry. Like that model, you know, had been developed a long time ago, and we've been innovating for a long time within the constraints, you know, of that model. When we live in a world where we need transformation and new business models. So I live right next door to Rhode Island School of Design, one of the world's, you know, leading, you know, design institutes. And I have a lot of friends, you know, that are designers, and I watched what they did, right? You know, Mr. Scientist MBA with all my analytical tools and superpowers, they had a different approach to problem solving, right? I watched them see it through the lens of a person, right? And really understanding their experience, and then having the guts to imagine a different model, right, to help that customer, right? Rendering it in a prototype. They had no fear of rendering low fidelity models of what they were trying to do, right? And designing it, and in an iterative, generative way, getting to something that was really exciting, you know, and became and emerged as a new design in the marketplace. So I said, I need that superpower, right? Because if I had that superpower, right, combined with my business and science skills, I could apply them to design a business model, something they weren't doing. They were designing all kinds of stuff. And I said, what if we could design a business model the same way? And I started to build the tools and the methodology to do that. So for me, human-centered design represents a couple of things. One, what I call changing your lens. You will never transform anything if you see the opportunity set through the lens of your current business model. You will, if you use that lens, you will design things that fit into that business model, right? That straitjacket that constrains and controls how you work, right? What the rules are, how you behave. It drives the cultural norms, right? It's all based on these models that have been in existence for a very long time. The first step in any transformation process is to see the opportunity set, not through the lens of the enterprise you identify with or you're in, right? Or your profession or whatever your model is, but to see it through the lens of someone else. And I think the customer is the right anchor, right? To actually see the lived experience, not through the lens of your enterprise. That's the only way you're going to see what the real job to be done is, not what you think the job to be done is, but what they know the job to be done is, and what the pain points are in their experience. Now I can start to imagine a business model. But if you do it from the constraints of your current business model, right, it's not going to be anything more than an incremental change. If you want to transform the customer experience, you need a new model. So you need the conditions and tools, you know, to do that, which is why I always tell leaders transformational change is very different than incremental change and innovation. You need to organize it differently, and you need a whole different set of tools. Human-centered design is the first fundamental superpower because it gives you the luxury, the blessing of seeing the opportunity set in a new, fresh way that you don't see when you wear the glasses or the lenses of the way your current business model works.
So, Saul, let's take an application of this idea. And when you look at education, and specifically higher education, when you look at it, who is the customer? Who should it be
Yep.
designed for? Should it be designed for the people who are paying the fee and therefore are the customer, or should you say that they eventually get absorbed into the business world or something? If, let's say, if you're looking at it from the lens of an MBA or a business school,
Yep.
or are you sort of taking a broader picture and saying they should be able to impact the society in which the businesses operate, in which case, that's a very different lens. How do you come to the conclusion which one
Yep.
is right?
Yeah, great question. Great question, Abhijit. And I have this discussion, and it often takes a very long time. It's amazing to me how bogged down we get in that very simple question of who the customer is, right? Because immediately what happens is, depending on where you sit in the organization, you will say, particularly in a large enterprise, right? Somebody, what they'll do is they'll start naming stakeholders, right, in the value network. Right. So, and they'll say, our job is to, is to compel this stakeholder group, the investors, the suppliers, the distributors. I believe that you should center in on who we're trying to solve a problem for, the end user, and that's the customer. Right. I grew up in the pharmaceutical industry. Right. It's a classic example. Right.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing a little bit more, but they still have a very long way, to be customer centric, in my view. Right. Because somebody else pays the bill. Right? Because all the other stakeholders are necessary in order to deliver value to the consumer. And this is why more and more people are being left behind by one-size-fits-all models. We get further and further away from the real customer and what the real purpose is in the first place, right, of what we're trying to do, which is create solutions, right, for a customer. So the pharmaceutical industry is trying to create a solution that's supposed to be for me when I need that to take better care of myself or to treat myself when I get sick. But all the other stakeholders in that value network, right, that influence that decision, maybe control that decision more than I think is necessary, when we'll come back to that, right? I think we've got to get more, I think we have to unleash more personal agency, right, and empower the consumer again. And the good news is the technology is emerging so fast and the tools are emerging so quickly that we can organize, we can self-organize. I think the biggest trend right now, and the thing that's bringing institutions to their knees, and there are examples of this every week, is what I call self-organized purposeful networks. Self-organized purposeful networks, right? And it's organic. It starts with the end user, right? And it emerges this way. And enterprises have been incredibly slow, right, to harness this trend. And pretty soon that trend is going to overtake them, right? Because we're going to command the tools necessary to organize networks and to map products and services to the experience we want and need. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. And education is a great one, right? To just answer the question more simply, the student is the customer. I mean, that's why we're there. Other stakeholders are critical, right, to delivering value. Right, some think they're more critical than they really are when you look at new technologies coming into the marketplace, and they're very slow to embrace it, right? This is why we don't change, because people in a business model, right, or people in a profession that went to school for a very long time to do something, right, and have degrees from fancy places, right, think they're the experts. Right? And what we're becoming more expert in our own lives and able to grab the information, grab the tools, grab the support, configured in a way that aligns with our lives. And this is the pressure that's going to force large enterprises to transform themselves faster, which we really need.
We've got two quick questions, and you've partly answered the first one, which is Sanjeev Saigal wants to know, how do we know what the clients want when they're actually used to the legacy working system? So that's the only thing they have experienced. So what is the right way to understand what is right for the client or customer?
You in my world, you use the magic words, client and customer, right? Right. And so a lot of the work I've done has been focused on trying to help enterprises do the things we're talking about today, right? My entire life, I have every black and blue mark you can possibly imagine, trying to convince leaders of very large enterprises, right, to change it all, never mind to transform, right? And there's a whole industry, as you know, right? And the problem I had is my business model, the work we did, was dependent on enterprises paying the bill to get the services I had to offer, right? And then I kept scratching my head and saying, you know what? Like, they're not adopting these solutions fast enough. Therefore, we're not changing society fast enough. So now I'm literally pivoting BIF from sponsored projects. We've been in business for 16 years. We've done 70 really amazing projects, all sponsored by enterprises, very few of which made it all the way through the process to a transformational business model that can now emerge in the marketplace. And maybe some of that was we weren't good enough, but I'm sure a lot of it was the obstacles to change and transformation in the enterprise. So we're pivoting from sponsored projects to self-initiated projects now, a smaller portfolio of projects where we pick a design challenge that we are passionate about solving. We use the tools and methodology we've developed over 16 years, and we design new ventures, right? So we're becoming entrepreneurial again. We're going to launch new ventures. We've got our first one all the way into the prototype phase already. It's in the maternal health space. It's called LunaYou, and it's a beautiful design challenge. The pain points are so obvious. The research and evidence is so clear that unleashing agency and empowering women, right, to take better care of themselves can create better health outcomes. But we live in a healthcare system that wasn't designed for that, right? It was designed for when we get sick and have disease. And heck, pregnancy isn't even a disease. So we built a personalized well-being platform to enable women, to give her the information, the support, and the tools she needs to be empowered to improve her own outcomes, and then use the medical system when something goes wrong to be available when there's an emergency, right? And so we're integrating with the system, but we're dropping a new model into the system that is wired differently than the way most businesses are in the healthcare market.
Is it then, what it seems to me is that if you empower the customer or the consumer creates a path, and then you build a business model around that. Is that another way of putting it, or have I got it all wrong?
You identify a challenge, right? I like to pick the ones that are really systems challenges, big, complex, systems challenges. And then you understand the experience of the end user in today's system. And you immediately start identifying the pain points in that experience. This is who they hire today, right? This is where they go to get product, service, information, right? This is what their experience is doing that, right? And there's no shortage of pain points in every one of these social systems, whether it's education, healthcare, you pick the industry, we can easily identify the pain points. And then we can start to say, what's their job to be done? How do we now imagine a new business model? First conceptually, so first on the whiteboard, but it isn't worth spending, a very short amount of time. These companies that spend years designing something, right, trying to convince themselves that it'll give them a predictable result, it's crazy, right? They should be taking stuff off of the whiteboard and a napkin sketch, putting it into the real world to see if that model could actually render change at a small scale, before they grow. We got to get much faster at doing this kind of experimentation.
Which is the rapid prototyping, which is what you talk about.
which is the second superpower, right? Like I learned how to do it in a big company enterprise market. You never do anything unless you have the evidence base that you should do it, and you can show the economic returns of what it looks like at scale, right? That's how you pick between project A, B, C, or D. That's how my projects got funded by enterprises. That's how projects get funded within enterprises or institutions, right? But you got to be able, to unleash and invest in and move early stage ventures, new business models that represent transformational ways to change it. And prototyping is the key difference. We're used to doing, pilots in industry. I've got an idea, right? I've got it out there in a pilot with 100 people, and once I put it out there, I'm testing that model and how it works with 100, right? To get more confidence that I can go to 1,000, 10,000, 10 million. Prototyping is different. Prototyping takes a low fidelity concept off the whiteboard into the real world. First, it's a low fidelity prototype, literally bubble gum and baling wire, right? And you're seeing whether your concept of a model could actually work in as close to a real world environment as you can render it. And then once it's working, you learn in real time, and then in a generative way, you start moving to make it work. So it's not an analysis to see after a 6-month pilot, did it or didn't it work? It's a period of prototyping where you're changing the model on the fly to get to something that works. It's a generative design process, and it's a real superpower, because I know from my enterprise life, right, good luck trying to get permission, from a senior leader and the resources necessary to do it when your entire model and all the financial metrics and tools are driven towards predictability. This is why we don't change our business model.
So, when I sort of draw, so the image that was coming to my mind when you were describing this is, when I do, let's say I do a sketch note or something, so I kind of do a little layout, with pencil, and then I kind of say, oh, I think the font is too big. So if I put this much of space for the title, it's not going to leave enough for all the ideas. Then you sort of shift it to the side, it looks tilted. Then you kind of say that, okay, I've done that. I mean, I seem to have taken up all the white space. So let me just knock off what I can, simplify it. So it is this iterative process. Is that, how it is?
I love this, because it takes me right to the third superpower, which I call storytelling and engagement. And I smile because I've seen your graphic illustrations. You have a superpower, my friend, right? You know how to take complex conversations and help visualize them. That's one of your superpowers, not your only one, but it's one of them. I can't do it, right? Like if you see one of my drawings, you'd laugh. Here's what storytelling and engagement means. In the old world, it was push marketing, top down, right? We have a department, a PR department that controls the storytelling and the messaging. We have a marketing and communication set of departments. They control the messaging both in the organization and out of the organization. Transformation doesn't work that way. Transformation works when you can integrate stories that are works in progress, right? They are visualizations of, and all kinds of ways to create a story using different storytelling channels and modes that help somebody enter the conversation, and then you build on it. You do graphic illustrations. I've seen you do it in several conversations I've been in. That picture you create has incredible meaning for those of us that were in the conversation, and then it intrigues people who see it to say, what was that conversation about? I like to be in that conversation. And then you use other superpowers you have to kind of reel us into the conversation using other channels. Now we're having a real conversation organically with people that are motivated to be in the conversation. Change management for transformation is different than change management for incremental change. Change management for transformation means you get really, really good at storytelling in lots of different formats. I don't care if it's music or dance or narrative or drawing pictures, right? Everybody creates an emotional connection to a different kind of storytelling. And if you can engage me in the production of the story and you allow me in when it's unfinished business, something enterprises hate, right? Because they don't want it to go out to the marketplace until it's gone through 8 layers of bureaucracy and they approve it. In the 21st century, everybody in the enterprise is a storyteller. Everybody uses internal and external channels to share the story through their lens. And that's how you grow a movement more than a traditional company. If you want your company to feel more like a movement where customers and the community is driving engagement and expanding it, right, you're going to have to learn the superpower of storytelling and engagement, and it isn't traditional marketing, PR, and comms. I can tell you that.
How did you talk to me about the way you learned the art of storytelling? What was that like? Talk to me about the exact process of building that skill.
Yeah, so, and I approached all 3 of the superpowers the same way, because they literally were human-centered design, rapid prototyping, storytelling, and engagement were what I call the 3 superpowers of transformation. And it was personal for me. The way I got there is the way I get everywhere, right? I only know and can really understand and act on something when I embody it myself. It's got to be personal, right? Because when I make it personal, and this is the secret of agency and empowerment, right? If it's my story, I'm going to be a lot more engaged into it than if it's a story that you're trying to shove down, and get me to, to participate in. So I knew I needed these new superpowers because I could see that the superpowers I got from the early part of my career were not working in the transformational space. I used to think that you could proselytize to get people to change to something significant, right? If I just keep talking enough, it's pretty obvious. I can talk forever, right? And I'm reasonably smart, and I do great decks, right? So I thought if I just and I use what I call the Jewish aunt theory of management, right? My Jewish aunt theory of management. I will nudge you until you change. I used to think that I could get you to change with those tools. I can't. Those tools don't work to get people to change. The only thing that works to get people to change is when they can see themselves in the story themselves, right? So I had to learn these superpowers. So I'll answer your question about storytelling, but it was the same for the other 2, right? And it was hard for me because I'm a classic marketing guy. I mean, my claim to fame when I was in industry, before I went into consulting, I worked at Eli Lilly and Company, right? A big pharmaceutical company, great company, still a great company to this day in an industry that's been consolidating like crazy, right? I learned competency thinking starting there. They were way ahead of their time in thinking about competencies versus just the org chart. But when I launched Prozac, I was very clear immediately.
That's the depression, antidepressant.
Yeah, that was my big claim to fame. At Lilly, I got the opportunity as a young leader to work on the U.S. introduction of a product called Prozac. And I usually say that it was successful despite us, but it was not a share-taking game. It wasn't the classic, right, analyze our way to the future. It was a market-making game, right? It required these new superpowers, right? And that's where I first learned this, the difference between share taking and market making. What does it mean to be a market maker versus a share taker? Who are the market makers? How do I learn that? How do I teach others that? How do I build education and training programs that appreciate this? So this has been a through line of everything we've done, including every model that we design at BIF. Was being able to do that, and not as a bolt-on to an old model. I didn't take these superpowers and just say, I'm keeping the same model I used to have to solve problems. I made these the core, and then I took the old ones and I kept them on board as enabling capabilities. I changed the core capabilities, which reinvented me. By reinventing me, I could now start building tools and methodologies and taking on project work to help other enterprises do it. And now I'm coming back full circle to say, I think we know how to do it. I think we can pick our own design challenges and take new ventures out to the marketplace so we can start to see these kinds of changes happen. They're an integral part of what I do every single day, but it didn't happen overnight. I had to learn how to do it. And to the very first conversation we had, Abhijit, right? I didn't learn it in school, right? There wasn't a classroom to teach me how to do it. I learned it by doing it, by hanging out with others who knew how to do it, by building a purposeful network, which is what we did at BIF, right? We've got a 16-year network of a lot of people that are on that same learning curve, right? That wanted to embrace those same superpowers. And now that network is far and away our biggest asset, right? Because there are folks who are innovation junkies, in a network, some more tightly engaged than others, right? That have all been listening, watching, engaging, importing those tools back into their lives, to their enterprises, and back home into their communities.
So in some sense, Saul, I believe that a really powerful story that you write, whatever that might be, big or small, a really powerful story is the one which actually changes you in the process of writing.
100%. People ask me every day. One of the things I've done, you've been witness to this. And look, I didn't do it at first when social media first started, right? My team was saying, we gotta play. And I resisted it like any dinosaur resists change. I resisted it. I was not the early adopter until I think they got me on Twitter first, right? But then I recognized the power of social media. Most people use it because they think they're promoting themselves, right? Well, I don't use it to promote myself at all, right? I use it because it's like going to school every day. I have curated a network around the world. You're in it. And every day I have people provoking me. Hey, Saul, that was a good idea. Have you thought of this? Do you know this person? Or I'm vulnerable enough to say, Saul, that's a really bad idea. That sucks. Don't do that. Let me tell you why, right? And I let it all come in. I think you have to work out loud. That's what storytelling is. It isn't putting a pretty bow on something, waiting till it's beautiful, putting it out there, having a press release at a big conference, right? And saying, okay, now look at us, look at how great we are. Because then the crowd that's been watching what you've been doing behind the curtain, right? It takes them weeks to take down things that companies have been planning for 4 years. And if they had just started in an emergent way and built the crowd organically, right, they would have had much better success. This is what the new model looks like. This is why you've got to think in terms of your business model, and innovation can't just be how to strengthen the model I already have. It has to be a both and, because no one leaves a core model, right, overnight. This is a mistake and the premise of our very conversation. If you're obsessed with scale, in your head, you think, I've got a model, it works good, I know what my role is, I'm respected, right? In that model, and now you're talking about another model, and when I take it all the way to scale, it looks like I'm going to stop doing this model, and then tomorrow I'm going to start doing this next one. That's not how transformation works. You got to keep pedaling the bicycle of what you're doing today, and then you got to carve out enough attention and resource and time to begin to explore and experiment with new superpowers so that you can put yourself in the position to determine whether and when it's time to reinvent, to pull the trigger on, I'm leaving this model behind and I'm going to this one. And maybe that never happens. But if you don't put yourself in the position to do it, you're in trouble. You're going to get Netflixed. You're going to get disrupted. Just look at what happened over the course of this pandemic. It is sad to me around the world how ill-prepared we were, right? The reason we were not prepared to do the things that we're only doing in the pandemic because we're constrained. The old, necessity is the mother of all invention. We wait until it's too late, and then we decide we need to change. And I can't begin to share how much pain I've observed over the last year from people who weren't ready, and folks that were the most behind in entering this new 21st century idea of the way we work are the ones that got hurt the worst. And it is painful to watch. We've got to do better than that. But it takes time. You can't scale it on day one. It has to emerge organically. And that's the rub, isn't it?
So, Saul, we are into the last 8 minutes of our conversation, and I'm going to sort of do kind of really like a rapid fire kind of responses. Talk to me about, how do you plan your day? What does your day look like? Typically, how much time do you spend doing what? I mean, broad chunks.
Love it. A very short answer to that is I'm one of these odd people, I suspect you might be too, who doesn't want to set strategy one tactic at a time, right? You've got to have a view of the future. What are you trying to do? It can be like by next month or next year or 5 years. You need to be planful. But you also need to be able to throw the plan out the window, right? But that doesn't mean you don't have one, right? And so if you ask me on any given day, I will tell you, these are the things I'm trying to get better at today. These are the things I'm trying to accomplish today that are core, right? Not frivolous. They're not just because, I got another email, that said I should do this, that. I don't just allow all the stuff to bubble up, and then let the day-to-day stuff drive how I spend my day. I have a plan that I go into. It always gets blown to smithereens, and that's okay. But I'm cognizant. If you ask me at the end of the day, did I make progress on what I set out to do? If I can't tell you that I made progress on that, I'm going to double down on it tomorrow and the next day. I'm going to keep in the front of my lens the things I'm trying to do, the future I'm trying to create, and I'm going to work towards it. A lot of people will say, that you can tweak your way to transformation. I do not believe you can. I think you need a vision for the transformation that drives you, and then you take small steps towards that vision. That's different than tweaking randomly stuff in your current model, right? You can take small steps for both, but one of them is surrounded by vision and one of them isn't.
When you look at, the future, what are some of the things you wish to accomplish in a 3 to 5 year time frame? What skills do you want to build? What businesses do you want to build? What changes do you want to see in your life? What would you say?
Yeah. So over the next 3 to 5 years, and that's the right time horizon. And when you get to be my age, those 3 to 5 year time chunks really matter. And so it really helps to be planful about that. In 3 to 5 years, I think we will have created 5 new ventures at BIF. They'll all be in this personalized well-being that measurably changes healthcare outcomes. The first one will be in maternal health. We've even got ideas of what the next 4 will look like. We're changing the BIF business model to go from sponsored projects to capture value to more of a venture studio vision, where we're raising dollars to help finance the design and prototyping phases by participating in the spinoff of these ventures. And in there, all the superpowers I've spent the last 15 years building are right at the core. I've got to learn a couple of new ones, right? I haven't been as close to the finance world. I know enough to be dangerous, but I haven't lived in that world. And so I've got to build some superpowers there. And so I'm having lots of conversations every day with those folks, because no matter what, there's going to be a meaningful part of every single day in my life that I'm doing, that I do this kind of thing, right? That I'm just exploring, I'm having what I call random collisions with unusual suspects or making a ruckus, right? I don't know what I'm going to learn until I have my next conversation. And there's a big piece of my day that I weave that in, because that's where the insights around the next superpowers I need to learn and strengthening the ones I'm trying to build on, that's where they come from.
What is a book that you've repeatedly gone back to get inspired by?
Oh God, so many. I'm an avid reader. Oh my goodness. I would call out my friend John Hagel and John Seeley Brown, my friends, who wrote The Power of Pull. The whole paradigm of from push to pull, central to everything we've talked about, right? We grew up in a push top-down world. We're now in a world where pull is at the core, and we don't know how to do it. Writ large, we do not know how to live in that world and to thrive in that world, build enterprises in that world. And so there are a bunch of books you could read that would get you to that same place. Obviously read mine. It'll give you some of the insights around those superpowers, but that's a really good one.
So 2 questions you can ask me.
Oh my goodness! What are you taking away? Like I presume you're going to do one of your graphic illustrations to help you think about the conversation we just had, and then share it. I'm just guessing that's something you might do. So what's in your mind?
So I kind of like the idea of the 3 superpowers, because that I think is very powerful. For me, that was a big one, and this whole idea of the rapid prototyping, for me also the idea that you can't sort of build a story and then present it. It's something that you co-create in some sense with the protagonists themselves. In this particular case, it is the consumer, so you sort of really work along with that. That would be my takeaway from our conversation.
Well,
what's
I look forward to it. I really do. I'm sorry.
And I said that was one question. Do you have another one?
I get to ask another one, right? Give me your top of mind insights around how we do this globally, right? How we think about this. I think these network systems, these new purposeful networks, ultimately are global. So what are you thinking as you listen to me sitting over here in America, yakking about all this stuff?
So I think there are some, when you look at any change or any idea from the lens of a country, you get bogged down by a whole lot of differences. There are language or cultural differences and all that stuff. So I think then in which case it becomes far more complex. But when you look at it from a human lens, what is it that matters to a human being? I just think that then, regardless of the country, then it's really a boundaryless concept. And I'm very sort of wedded to the idea of boundarylessness being one of the shifts, 5 shifts that I talk about in my book. But this is certainly the big one, that when you look at it from a human point of view, everything is really boundaryless, because then you and I are not very different. We want similar things for ourselves, and you want it to be a fair world, you want equity, you want justice, etc. All of that. I mean, then there are human ideals that you strive towards. But thank you so much.
I love that. I would just say to you that nation states are probably one of the world's oldest business models and pretty intransigent. So boundaryless is a really nice design challenge, isn't it? I love it. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Saul. I so appreciate your doing this. And, it's... I couldn't have thought of a better person to get episode 1 of season 2. Thank you so very much for agreeing to be here. And I will share that sketch note with you. Hopefully you will like it.
Sorry to put you on the spot, my friend. If you weren't planning on doing it now, that's the Jewish aunt thing in me, I guess.
That's the way it should be. Thank you so much. Goodbye. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Appreciate your coming over. And thanks a lot. And I'll see you next week. Don't forget to tune in at 7 p.m. next Wednesday, India time, because we have another really terrific guest who's going to come up. You can't afford to miss that one. Bye-bye.